Welcome back, dear viewers. The 21st century has its fair share of horrible jobs. Bad conditions, bad pay, and even worse prospects. Each of our respective jobs can be often tedious and hard. However, they were not compared to certain jobs in history that weren't just hard but also disgraceful. It's hard to imagine people would choose to pursue these careers, right? But just a reminder that not everyone who worked these jobs had a choice and were forced into these careers, most of which were insecure, dangerous, and poorly paid. Here are 10 worst jobs in history. Don't forget to share, subscribe, like, and turn on the bell for more interesting videos. A cautionary note, not safe to watch while eating or if you have a weak stomach. Number 10. Maggot farmer. We have all heard of farmers who grow crops or raise cows for a living, but have you heard of maggot farmers? You heard it right. Maggot farmers are people who breed maggots on an industrial scale. Sounds gross. Well, you can be sure it is worse than how it sounds. The smell that comes off this job is said to be horrific and unbearable. Each maggot farmer grows about 10 to 50 million maggots to provide as bait for the fishing industry. They provide both live and dead bait, but they mostly work with live bait throughout the day. It is said to be a difficult process to keep the bait alive. All of us are wondering why people take this career, aren't we? Well, the answer to this is this career is taken up as it makes easy money. But not to worry, these farmers wear protective gear mainly to stop themselves from vomiting of the stench and to protect their hands from bites and blood-sucking. Hopefully, they have a better life outside their jobs. Number 9. Egyptian mummifier. We've all heard of mummies. Everybody is fascinated by the Egyptians, but do we know the person who is behind these fascinating customs? Mummification or artificial preservation of a corpse was a glorified and much practiced custom in ancient Egyptian times. The mummification process included the removal and cleaning of internal organs. The extraction of the organs was done by shoving a hook up the corpse's nose and dragging the remains out. Ooh, that sounds painful. But hey, they were dead. It would then be followed by removing and drying the body of any residual moisture and then embalming the body with oil and natural preservatives. This process took weeks or sometimes even months, by which time the corpse would begin to decay and have a stench. Unfortunately, even though mummification was a glorified custom, the mummifiers were shunned and looked down upon by their society as they dealt with dealing dead bodies. As they were also surrounded by dead bodies, the common people would refuse to go near them or touch them as they carry the smell of death. They weren't allowed on the streets during its busy hours and were confined to their workspace. Number 8. Sin Eater. This bygone job doesn't sound as bad as its name, but it's bad if you believe that you pay for sins in the afterlife. What do sin eaters do? The sin eaters was required to help cleanse any dying person's soul. This job was a very disturbing one. They had to eat by the corpse in order to take their sins that the dead had done upon themselves. They were summoned after the person was dead, and most of the time it took days to travel and the corpse would begin to decay. Yes, they had to eat by a decaying corpse. The food included was a very little amounts of dry bread and ale. They were kept away from society, viewed as less than people, and they were abhorred by the superstitious villagers as a very unclean thing. Number 7. Tanner. Tanner? Does that name sound familiar? I can assure you, it is not the same tanners as the ones from the Full House. Tanners played an essential role in preserving the hides of animals like cattle and pig. It is known for being the most disgusting job of all time. Process of preparing the hide was a tedious and foul-smelling job. It involved soaking the hides in urine to remove the hair, followed by soaking in giant pits of lime to soften the tissues. The hair and fat had to be scraped off by hand. The cleansed hide was re-immersed in a pit of water mixed with dog feces to additionally soften it. These pits were alternately fermented between batches of hides. The Victorian tannery was known to be a very revolting and rank-smelling place. Thankfully, we don't live in those times, right? Number 6. Resurrectionist. This was a rather fancy name that was given to body snatchers and grave robbers. Body snatchers? Yes, they exist even today, but they had very different roles in different centuries. Weird. These snatchers and robbers drag corpses from their graves after digging them up to supply corpses to medical schools for which they got minimal payment. Once the supply of corpses in and around the city diminished, many of them turned to murder to get minimal payment and keep up with the demand. There was an increase in the number of murders to keep up with the demand. This job brought about a lot of sorrow and dejection not only to the people who worked this job but also to the society once the murders got out of hand. Number 5. Match girl. Matchmakers make a perfect match, please. But oh, wait a minute. This isn't a matchmaking site. That's what you thought it was. Rather, these are factories which are present in Old London. Manufacturing matches wasn't the disgusting part of the job, but it would have not been fun, would it? It merely included dipping short sticks of wood into a phosphorus solution for which the women got paid well. The grossness of this job particularly came after a person had been on the job for a few years. Happens with every job, doesn't it? Inhaling the phosphorus for long periods caused ailments which was known as phossy jaws. The effects of this ailment were that the gums would begin to abscess and give off a foul-smelling discharge, and eventually the absorption of the phosphorus would worsen the effects to the extent where it caused the woman's jaw to have a very distinguished and eerie glow. The only known treatment for this ailment was a harrowing operation where the entire jawbone was removed, leaving the face muscles loose. Number 4. Whipping boy. Thinking of whipped cream? Do whipping boys sound like they were the ones who used to make whipped cream? Well, sadly, the job is not as fancy as the name sounds. In early modern England, young princes were usually assigned a playmate who had to act as a whipping boy. Doesn't that make any sense? It meant that he would take on all the physical punishments which were handed out for the young prince's misdemeanors. Sound bad already? It gets worse. The cruelest thing was that the whipping boy would be allowed to forge a very strong bond with the prince and would be educated with him before he became the young prince's whipping boy. Once he became the whipping boy, his job was to be the stand-in and take the punishments which were meant for the prince. There were instances where the princes enjoyed this and would be naughty purposefully just to have the fun that came out of seeing that another boy whipped. Most of these whipping boys would be young or adolescent boys. Number 3. Leech collector. Leeches? Why were those blood-sucking menaces collected? In the Middle Age, the bare minimum description that could be given to medicine was primitive. Methods such as bleeding were considered to be a common practice to cure a multitude of medical ailments. There was a unique method of bleeding a patient that called for letting leeches suck the blood out, which had to be collected from nearby ponds and bogs. A leech collector would wade or plow through the leech-infested marshes and collect as many leeches as possible. Most often, they would collect the leeches by going in bare-legged and squishing around until the dreaded creatures would attach themselves to their legs, sucking on the blood. Scary, right? They were often pulled off and dropped into a bucket to be sold to the town's doctor or a known medical professional. They would do this day after day before letting the old wounds heal. Number 2. Vomit collector. Are you thinking if you heard it right? Who collects vomit? And why do they collect vomit? Let me start by telling you when this happened. During ancient Roman times, there were rooms dedicated to regurgitating food. These practices existed so that people could vomit out the food and eat more food at the feast, as it was considered rude not to eat a lot during feasts. Having to eat a lot of food, so much that you had to throw up to eat more. Most individuals would throw up in special receptacles, but certain people would simply throw up on the floor to avoid interrupting the feast and drinks. This required the service of a vomit collector who would have to clean it all up with their bare hands after people had thrown up. They had to clean everything without disturbing the feast, and if they did, they would be whipped for it. Number 1. Groom of the stool. Married to a stool that people sit on? This is not that stool, sadly. For a long time, kings were placed equivalent to gods, and it was considered improper or inappropriate for kings to wipe their own bottoms. Do you realize where this is heading? The groom of the stool was said to be a prestigious position assigned to a top-level aristocrat. How can it be prestigious? Though it was considered to be a prestigious and esteemed position, it was just as humiliating. The groom was responsible for fetching the king's toilet chair when needed, and after the king was done with his job, the groom was responsible for wiping his behind, collecting his stool on a timely basis for examination, and monitoring his health by analyzing his stool. If the king found himself constipated, the groom also had the privilege of administering an enema. So that's all, folks. Hope you all enjoyed today's video and appreciate your job more now. Don't forget to comment, like, subscribe for more such entertaining videos. Hit the bell icon to get notified. Till next time.